this year, we are focusing on how the economic shocks have affected the green innovation discourse and policy priorities. And then in this session, we're going to be talking about international cooperation to accelerate green technology innovation and also transfer. And for this session, I have the pleasure of introducing the moderator, Jens Lungsgaard. He is our fellow OECD colleague. He's the Deputy Director for Science, Technology, and Innovation, part of the OECD. And with that, I hand over the rest to Jens.
Merci beaucoup. Comme on est à Paris, je vais commencer.
Well, thank you very much. And as we're in Paris, I'm going to speak French to point out that we have interpretation.
We do have translation into French for anybody interested in the room or online. And, we will not handle an international challenge like climate and other environmental challenges without international collaboration. So that's the focus of this session. How do we do that? What's our experience of international collaboration on green innovation? What are the challenges, the benefits, and best practices? We'll be also looking at the experience from the COVID-19 development of vaccines happening so rapidly. Could we replicate that in the green domain? And as Matsukatsu reminded us yesterday morning, one thing is to develop a vaccine, but it's only really good if it actually gets out to people and gets out globally, because these are global challenges. So we'll also be speaking a lot about global diffusion and deployment of green innovations. To handle those questions, we have a wonderful lineup of good people. We will be hearing from two scene setters who are appropriately sitting here on the scene. The first of them is my good colleague, head of the Science, Technology and Technology Policy Division in STI, Alessandra Colleccia. Then we have next to her, David Elvira, head of Global Corporate Public Policy at Sanofi. After we've heard those two, we will have a panel with four people who are all online. In that sense, you can say we are really reliving the COVID experience of online in this panel. We have four people. That is Joanna Drake, Deputy Director General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission. Are you with us, Joanna? We hope you are there. We also have Amy Dieterich, Director of the Global Challenges Division, World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. We have Xiaoyong Grace Wang, Deputy Director for Program and Operations at the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. And last but definitely not least, we have Yannick Glemarek, Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund. There we are. Let's get down to business. And first, we give the floor to you, Alessandra, to set the scene.
Good morning, everyone. I have prepared some slides and I'm sharing the scene setting operation with David here. So, and I will say a few words on the work we are doing at the Science, Technology and Innovation Directorate on the role of international cooperation in science technology for green growth. And I'll start with the current context, which is not just about this multiple crises we heard of yesterday, so the pandemic, the energy, the food, the climate crisis. It's also about the geopolitical context we're living in, which is particularly challenging for international cooperation. And so how can we step it up, this international cooperation for green transitions? And how can we do it differently, learning from the lessons from the pandemic? This is what I will be concentrated on. So the context, it has been mentioned, so why it's so difficult to cooperate international nowadays, the economic context, the inflation, the looming recession, the fiscal consolidation, which means less resources for to finance STI for the green transitions. We have this anxiety, strategic competitions in science and innovation. It was evocated in the last panel. And you see on the right-hand side of the slide some of recent initiatives in the US, Europe, and China, and there are other ones around this strategic competition in science and innovation. And meanwhile, there are all these clean technologies that require natural resources at a greater scale. So for example, a typical electric car requires 6 times more mineral inputs than a conventional car. Or if you think about an onshore wind plant, this requires 9 times more mineral resources than a gas-fired plant of the same capacity. So these natural resources are also very much geographically concentrated. And we have China dominating the world production of lithium with a 60% share, of cobalt with an 80% share, and these are used for, to produce fuel cells. So this is the world we are living in. And what did we learn from COVID? That partnerships, collaboration, international cooperation are really at the heart of the STI response to COVID. And this is not just about, pooling resources or less duplications, minimizing cost sharing, or learning from collaboration in basic research to augment global knowledge. This is all what you find on the left-hand side of the slide. These are the typical, the benefits of international cooperation. But we argue with our work that we actually have to do international cooperation in STI a bit differently. And so we need to work, for example, we need to have greater accent on transdisciplinary research. We need to have new collaborative models. We need to have new ways of financing STI for challenges. And we also need to mobilize, we heard it already, we need to mobilize government, industry, civil society, everywhere at the global scale. So we have to think about missions, we talked about yesterday, but we have to think about designing them at the global scale. So I will just mention 3 key elements that you had on the previous slides. One is the collaborative platforms. So you see there on the right-hand side the ACT accelerator, and I'm hoping that John Arden Rottinger will mention this example. It was instrumental in the COVID-19 response, but in general we'll say that the work we are doing, and in particular with the Working Party of Bio, Nano and Convergent Technologies, the BNCT, on collaborative platforms. These are convergent spaces, so it's not just pooling resources, having technologies, the different actors and disciplines working together to innovate together. And this is relatively new forms and arrangements that are working pretty well in health. But they need to be scaled up. I mean, they really rely on a handful of countries and philanthropies to finance these collaborative platforms. So the message is here, governments should help scaling up these initiatives and also transposing them to combat, address other challenges like the climate emergence. The other one is blended finance. Ann Mettler mentioned it yesterday. So we really have some, very demanding objectives. We need to be like that for addressing the climate emergency. And in this case, public investment is simply not enough. And bringing in private investment together with public investment is the only solution. And so this blended finance can be done, has been demonstrated. It's a question of designing this financial arrangement in a clever way and mobilizing private investments for STI, for the green transition. And you have there on the slide already some examples of this blended finance mechanism to address climate challenges. So they exist. The third, as I said, global missions. The COVID-19 has demonstrated that if we collaborate around specific focus and objective, we can go fast. So we need to be able to mobilize, but missions are usually designed as domestic mission. How can we design global missions for climate? We have here some examples. I mean, Anne also mentioned yesterday the Gates and European Commission initiative on breakthrough, but there are other examples of global missions. Here, mission innovation, 23 countries, the European Commission, even at the regional level. Again, the European Commission supporting 150 regions or communities in Europe to become clean by 2030, and we also have examples in the Asia-Pacific areas. So I hope that the panelists will be able to elaborate on some of these examples. So this is a very last slide. Again, I sum up the key elements, I think, that we need to step up the efforts based on our work, but my time is up, and so I'll pass the mic to David to give the private sector perspective. Thank you.
And my compliments to the speaker, because she really sticks to time, meaning that you will get a chance to ask questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you, Jan. Good morning, everyone. I will just complement what Alessandra has been explaining, taking two perspectives, two angles, the private sector perspective first, and second, the lessons learned when we have been dealing with global pandemic crisis, and what are more or less the lessons learned that we can apply to our innovation model, and also how the biotechnological innovation model can be also exported to other kind of innovation, like the green technology innovation. I will just share with you, complementing what Alessandra explained, my thoughts in three key pillars. One, what was done in the past as a lessons learned in a crisis mode. What currently, this is the second, what we are currently keeping, or what should be kept in order to have this speed of innovation in the future. And the third, being a pharmaceutical company, biotech company, also how we are addressing the innovation on green from the healthcare perspective. Also how we can apply the knowledge that we have on drugs and vaccines to also in the green transition. So my first message here is, as you can see, the development of candidates of vaccines has been exceptionally rapid. It's very well mission-driven approach and global mission-driven approach. You can see in the figure in the right-hand side of this slide, the figures. It's quite very relevant. You normally need in this sector around 10, 12 years to develop a vaccine or a drug. When you are adding the preclinical, clinical, phase 1, 2, and 3, as well as all the implementation of this innovation. As a sector, as a global community, we were able to provide the initial vaccine solution in 1 year. And what is the magic behind there? Obviously, this idea of joining efforts for one mission that was jeopardizing not only the health of our population, but also the economy, in the end, the economy and as well the health. So, and this global approach of multi-stakeholder collaboration. And maybe here, the takeaways. First, we are a science-driven, innovation-based sector. So the first thing that we should protect is that science was working properly. And that for us means share information, have a sustainable, very robust surveillance system where the information was shared among all the stakeholders, obviously private ones, rapid data sharing, and access to all the pathogens information that were available. Second takeaway of lesson learned from the speed of innovation, the collaborative consultation and dialogue between global regulators or local regulators, regional regulators worldwide, and the private sector. This is normally done in a very, regular basis, but not at the speed that is needed when the urgency is clear. So lessons learned how to speed up these private, public, regulatory conversations so that we can anticipate the evidence that will be needed to authorize and reward the innovation. And this is very clear for our sector. This is our business. But maybe it's a lesson learned from others that are providing innovation in a more and more needed regulated sectors. The third maybe is the partnership. And here, let me just add two angles, two nuances to this partnership. Private partnership. So BioNTech, Pfizer were teaming up. We as a company were producing for our competitors. So that was a kind of new kind of private rapid decision of collaboration. And also private and public collaboration, of course. And here I will just go a little bit more deep dive in the next slide. And maybe the fourth takeaway here is the establishment of government structures for advanced market commitments. And let me just highlight here two ideas. So the main challenge of innovation, the first frog leap that is needed is from science to innovation. That's well known, how we have this leap, okay? And that requires having science in a consistent way. So we need to fund the infrastructures, the science infrastructures that provide the real public good, that is knowledge of science. And then we need the second kind of frog leap in innovation, as you said, Professor Mazzucato said yesterday, that is, well, innovation without access to innovation is not innovation, is invention. So how we have the frog leap to access to this innovation. And one of the lessons learned in the speed of this innovation and access to innovation is that there was this collaboration, private and public, to anticipate procurement and anticipate and share risk of development, innovation, production, and the risk, but then to be shared as a public need for a global community. And this procurement approach was also a success factor in our understanding. So, but this was the past. Let me, how we are keeping that, and I will accelerate. Because, sorry. What is how we can keep this path, and this speed? And here, let me just share with you a few ideas, 4 ideas. First, this sustainable long-term investment in science. Let me reinforce this idea. So, the role of public-funded science platforms were absolutely key for the success of the crisis. Okay, and I have the example of BARDA as a good example, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority in U.S. By the way, kind of call to action for Europe. By the way, it was a very sustainable funding science platform with the collaboration with the public sector. But what was the key aspect of success under our perspective? It was the fact that it ran perfectly the paradigm that we need a public-funded science to produce public good. That is the real market failure, knowledge to be shared, with plus and the efforts from the private sector to translate science into innovation. And this, by the way, is only possible when you protect the incentives. It was discussed in the previous panel. when you have the incentives as a private sector to have this translation into innovation. And obviously, the third, that is to provide access conditions in terms of market and supply and procurement and payment in order to make this innovation accessible to everyone. So first, this kind of continuous long-term investment in science. The second maybe aspect that I would like to put on the table as a takeaway of success, this data sharing, this information sharing, if we translate it in other sectors. That means, for example, we are very worried in terms of biodiversity, and we know about Nagoya Protocol, but we don't want to share information, we don't want to save pathogens, we want to kill them. So let's try not to overuse the global platforms to avoid what is needed for innovation, that is to kill pathogens and not to save pathogens. So just as a lesson learned and potential, recommendation to avoid, not to keep this path of speed in innovation, also to share information. And for our sector, pathogens information it's clear, but it's a good example. And finally, to consolidate as well these advanced purchasing agreements that were successful for the future, especially when you are in an area of innovation that is very risky. So you have to anticipate these financial and procurement tools. So continuous knowledge, data sharing, sustainable investment in research, global regulatory framework. I will not discuss that, but maybe during the panel we can discuss about that. Especially we are a regulated, super regulated sector. But the future of innovation in other sectors will be also regulated because we are asking for regulation. We are asking for recognition. We are asking for trust. That will mean that we will have regulatory frameworks that we have to deal with, and they have to be able to promote innovation and not to stop innovation. And this is also very clear in our sector, and we can also share that. I want just to share 30 seconds, I promise, on what is our understanding of these learnings and our contribution to green innovation. As a pharmaceutical company, just one message here. Obviously, we are an industrial sector as well. So we are doing what other sectors are doing to decarbonize our productions, our fleets, etc. But I just want to also share with you that the pharmaceutical companies and the pharmaceutical sector is also trying to understand innovation for green, And what is the way we understand that? We want to decarbonize our the patient pathway in the healthcare system. Just one figure, and then we will have an opportunity to discuss. One adult in UK, for example, pre-diabetic, emits about 10 tons, 15 tons of CO2. If he or she becomes diabetic, it multiplies by 2. Or even 3 if there is a kind of comorbidity, their individual emissions. So if our innovation is saving or taking care of our patients, we are also taking care of our planet. So but what is the kind of limitation here? And I'm fine, it's my last message. Something that can be shared with other sectors. Data gaps on how we measure emissions. Let's have the common language. Lack of regulatory standards that recognize first and reward our investment when we are reducing our emissions. And third, limited solutions to escalate. And this is why we insist in the need for procurement and payment infrastructures of innovation. Maybe with that, we can some material for panel discussion.
Definitely. Many, many thanks, David. Lots of good stuff here for further discussion. And looking around the room here, I see a lot of very competent people who can surely ask better questions than me. So do start to think of that. We will, though, have the panel participants, the 4 people that we have online. We will have them first, and we will start with Joanna Drake from the EU Commission.
Good morning, good morning, everyone. It's still morning. Thank you so much for these inspirational interventions. I have to say that I found a lot of points in common in the way that the Commission looks at things. In fact, the Commission has featured a lot in what the previous speakers have been propagating as, what sort of international collaborations we have to engage in and what sort of effort we need to engage in order to catalyze, if you like, and the deployment of innovations. I would like to start with one very clear statement that it's true that the crises have become the new normal, but I would like to reiterate that for the European Union, the Green Deal and the transition towards sustainable economy, plus also the digital economy, remains very much the cornerstone of European Union's policy making. I'm sure that the later parts of the panel, I will have the opportunity to illustrate this by very concrete examples. But we have been saying that both the green, the digital need breakthrough technologies, they need disruptive innovation and the new business models, but not only on paper. We need them as deployed innovations, as those that will create also not only the precipitation towards the transition, but I would say more importantly as well, the new jobs for which people can also not only have the skills, but also actually be employed, and therefore would give the new prospect of new engagement into the economy. Now, where does research and innovation sit in all this? Of course, we all know it's the crucial enabler of the Green Deal, and it will also accelerate the green transition. The research and innovation policy as such alone will not deliver much unless, of course, you have programs like the Horizon Europe, which is central to the work, and with a budget that's substantive, 95 billion for year 21 to 27, and at least 35% of that being dedicated to climate action. Of course, this has the promise of massively scaling up the green technological innovation that will contribute to the achievement of the 2030 and the 2050 targets. The Green Deal gives a positive example of what can be done and has as well led major international partners to set their own target dates for climate neutrality while promoting a level playing field and reciprocity underpinned by fundamental values. However, it's not only about setting examples, and we know this. We have to be active, and Europe has been active in supporting the aims of the Paris Agreement. I think we have seen this also in the latest COP, which ended last weekend. It has also given proof of this by strengthening and also coming up with new international partnerships. It has also given proof of this by setting standards and also by being very proactive in advocating on the world stage greater climate action through multilateral cooperation, as well as innovation policy for green technology. Now, international cooperation is paramount to achieve our climate objectives. The fight against climate change doesn't come in silos. No crisis comes in silos, in fact. And the more I think we have the opportunity to make observations and to reflect and to act on the types of crisis management that we need to undertake. Part of the management is engaging into having the fight on a global scale and working with international partners to scale up also the momentum in order for what would be a new normal. I would say, as well, in the way that we behave, in the way that we have different business models, in the way that we also have a structure and a governance for deploying innovations into the market and making them work. Horizon Europe therefore includes a new wave of research and innovation partnerships with member states, with partner countries, and with industry. And through this, we are hoping that we will achieve a faster drive towards transformation in major sectors such as hydrogen, such as steel, batteries, and more. Just to give one concrete example regarding international programs and international collaboration, if we just mention the mission innovation, which has already been referred to, but this is very much a concrete example of multilateral approach. We are working with 22 international partners. It actually is a framework for a multilateral framework to advance research and innovation for the European Green Deal through international collaboration, through showing the benefits of the global approach, also by harnessing the ingenuity of scientists and engineers around the world. If we look at, for instance, the part of mission innovation where we are co-leading the clean hydrogen mission, it aims at creating 100 hydrogen valleys worldwide by 2030, and also to dramatically increase the cost competitiveness of clean hydrogen. I think this is an important point that needs to be underlined. It's the European Union is also, the European Commission rather, is also co-leading the urban transition mission, which also is aiming to accelerate the green transition in cities worldwide. And at COP27, the first 48 cities were announced that are part of this global urban transition mission. And we are very proud that this global mission can build on our own cities mission, as you know, which have been conceived and are being rolled out under the Horizon Europe program. We're also playing an active part on the other 5 missions under mission innovation, such as the zero emission shipping and also the net zero industries. I think with this framework, we are ensuring that Horizon Europe actually has resonance beyond not only the European Union territory, but also to create waves and to really trigger into action and into deployment in other parts of the world as well. I think I'll stop here for now. I might have been taking up my 4 minutes already.
Thank you, Joanna. I would say that as someone having worked with innovation policies back in Denmark, what you have done with Horizon Europe deserves being well explained, as you just did. So your minutes were well taken. Now, I have to apologize for having misexplained a bit the order of speakers here and exactly who's with us, because we do not have Jannik Glemmerek, but we do have John Arne Rottingen, Norwegian ambassador for global health. And the way we will be taking the rest of our panel is that we will first have Amy Dietrich, then we will have Jon Arne Rottingen, and finally we'll have a video message from Xiaoyong Grace Wang. So please, Amy Dietrich, World Intellectual Property Organization. Do you call it WIPO or VIPO, or what's the sort of favorite way of saying it?
Thank you, Jens. So we tend to go with WIPO these days, just like our sister agency WHO up the road. So WIPO is preferred. And let me say good morning. I think I'm the very last person who has the right to say that because we're 2 minutes before noon. And actually, Jens, the fact that you didn't know how we like to call ourselves reminds me that I need to give an introduction to WIPO because there's actually very few people who know what WIPO is, or what intellectual property is, or what it does, or what we do. You can also call us WIPO at WIPO. So let me just begin by explaining that WIPO is a specialized agency of the United Nations, and our role is to essentially administer the global intellectual property system. And when we talk about the global IP system, the building blocks are mainly patents and copyrights, trademarks, geographical indications, design rights. I can't remember if I already said copyright. And then, of course, one of the latest hot topics has been trade secrets. So there is no one global agreement that governs trade secrets, and there is some questioning as to whether trade secrets are an IP right. But because we often get that question, we also deal with trade secrets. So specifically my division in WIPO, as you can call us, or WIPO, I deal with public policy at the intersection of intellectual property, or IP, and some of the biggest challenges facing the world today, which we currently define as those in the global health space, in the climate change and environmental degradation space, and in the food security space. And most of the major global challenges facing the world today are actually a combination of those three, or hitting on those three. So my division at WIPO, needless to say, we have a lot of work to do, and it's fascinating work. And for those who don't know anything about intellectual property, which I think is most people, because until you actually work in IP, you really know very little about it. And it's a very important component of innovation systems, but it is just a component. And one of its most important functions is actually making information about innovations transparently available. And that's one of the most important roles of WIPO. So we do administer the Global Patent Cooperation Treaty that lets innovators protect their innovations in multiple countries around the world. They can indicate however many countries they wish. And in response for that time, so they get that time-bound protection, and in return, we publicize their innovation. So WIPO, through our patent scope database, has, oh my gosh, hundreds of millions of patent entries where you can see exactly what is the innovation that has been registered and where. So what this means is that the global patent system is actually providing us with a huge data source that gives us some insight into global innovation, including global innovation in the space of green technology and green innovation. And what WIPO has been trying to do over the past close to 10 years is really use and harness that incredibly powerful data source to speed up the transition from what we would call the current kind of the global economy, which I don't want to use colors here, but it's brown rather than green, since we have a lot of, the global economy is built on a lot of very polluting technologies. WIPO is really trying to speed the transition from this current global economy that we have to a much greener global economy. And how we're trying to do that is by harnessing the power and the data that the global IP system provides to match demand with cleaner, greener technologies with the need. So we are trying to really reduce the market transactions and costs associated with increasing the uptake of green technology. And how are we doing that? Well, we have used something that's called the YO2 Green Technology Classification Scheme. We have applied that to large portions of WIPO's patent scope database, and we have been able to extract the patents that relate to green technology. We have then uploaded them onto something called the WIPO Green Database, and you can look at that anytime you want. It's free to access. We have more than 30,000 green technologies listed on the WIPO Green Database. And what we've done is we've pulled those patents onto the database, and we've applied something called the patent to solution algorithm, whereby you can see whether the technology that is described in the green patent has actually been brought to market through any kind of product that is now publicly available, publicly accessible. So this is all part of taking the IP system, which is agnostic. All industries use the IP system, whether they are inventing, better roller skates or a faster rocket ship or potentially a better solar panel. So the IP system is agnostic. And one of the things that we here at WIPO are looking at is how can we take that part of the global innovation system and really harness it in a purposeful way to speed up not only green innovation, but the dissemination and use of green innovation. So in other words, translating the process of patenting to actually making those innovations available on the market and getting those into the hands of the demandeurs. So that's my intro, and I think I have used exactly 5 minutes.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. Let's go on to Norway. Jon Arne Rottingen, you are global ambassador for global health issues.
Yes, thank you very much, Jens, and thanks to OECD for inviting me to this very interesting panel. In many ways, I will comment, I guess, first and foremost now on the experiences from the pandemic. And so in that sense, bringing us back to the points made by Alessandra and David. Because the pandemic has really shown how connected we are, how dependent on each other, how local is global and how global is local. And we've seen the interdependencies across sectors and how progress on sustainable development can only occur when understanding these interconnections, the trade-offs, the synergies between the different sector goals. As we know, the COVID-19 pandemic was also an example of a zoonotic spillover, and it illustrates the interconnections between health protection and climate change and biodiversity loss. And data really demonstrates that the number of and the impact or the size of infectious disease outbreaks are really increasing, driven indeed by these changes in addition to your urbanization and increased connectivity in general. So a One Health lens is really necessary to prevent and prepare for future epidemics and pandemics. But more narrowly, I will really now focus on the experiences experiences from the access to the COVID-19 tool accelerator, a partnership established and mentioned by Alessandra by the 10 global health agencies. It's in collaborations with key countries, including the G20. We have recently conducted an independent external evaluation of ACT Accelerator. And in general, the results are positive. We could probably not have done much better given external factors and given that this was all set up in a couple of months, early 2020. And there are also very positive assessments from the country cases that were a part of the evaluation. ACT Accelerator mobilized $23.7 billion for R&D, for market shaping, for pool procurement, and for delivery of vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. The vaccine pillar, also known as COVAX, have been the most successful, but still we have seen large inequities in access to vaccines. And in many ways, the coverage rates in low-income countries were 7 to 8 months at least behind when we reached coverage rates in the high-income countries. So the evaluation is really pointing towards what can we do to improve the situation for the future. David is already really explained well the need to collaborate and the need to both invest from public funding in investments and in push investments and incentives for industry, as well as public pull incentives, and that has played a really crucial role in rapid vaccine development. And indeed, in particular from the so-called advanced procurement agreements, where governments, either unilaterally or in regional groups like the EU, took on most of the risks of development. And the evaluation highlights how public financing also when structured in this case as blended finance, because of course this was together with the investments made by the companies, that this is important. But given the delay in access to all countries and the point that an invention is only an innovation when access is achieved, we really need to do better when it comes to equitable access. And that can be related to how we ensure that there are some conditions on these public finance contracts or the role of public finance in blended finance when it comes to access, pricing, and technology transfer to countries in most need. And the current negotiations on a pandemic treaty that are just started at the World Health Organization could potentially cover some of the principles, policies, and practices in that space. I really agree with David that open science and sharing of data and pathogen data is key, but we also need to share both risks and benefits across public and private sector, and we cannot socialize the risk and privatize the profits fully. And I think there needs to be a balance moving forward on this, and that can only be secured and ensured through good partnership arrangements. For the pandemic influenza, we have negotiated previously the pandemic influenza preparedness framework that tried to balance some of this. Whether that is the best approach, I'm not sure, but at least it's something to learn from. Finally, I would also highlight that the really demonstrates that we need global collective mechanisms to coordinate research and development, both in a peacetime, in preparedness phase, and in a crisis. On the vaccine side, we have these organizations in an end-to-end perspective, a mission-oriented perspective when it comes to ensuring access to technologies. However, in therapeutics, in diagnostics, that system is not really established. So, as a former head of a national research and innovation funding agency, I would really call for mission-oriented approaches, but that we need to develop these not only at national levels, but also see how we can collaborate at regional and global levels. I know that the Global Research Council, the overarching sort of umbrella organization, collaborative organizations of research funders, are exploring a way to collaborate on mission-oriented approaches to sustainable development challenges. So happy to discuss this more later.
Very fine. Thanks for that. Now we have a recorded message from Xiaoyun Grace Wang.
Good morning, colleagues. I would like to thank OECD for inviting UN Office for South-South Cooperation to join this very important conversation. COVID-19 pandemic has put development cooperation to an unprecedented test. It also taught us lessons to value solidarity and global cooperation more than ever before. During responses to the pandemic, South-South and triangular cooperation has risen to the test, with new trends and opportunities shown, such as stronger commitment to multilateralism, enhanced cooperation in science, technology, and innovation, increased openness in sharing good practices, appropriate technologies, and data. All these, if fully leveraged, can make important contribution towards addressing the challenges in green transition as well. Recovery from the pandemic offers us a big opportunity for green transition. However, it is often challenging and expensive for the bulk of developing countries. The majority of environment-friendly technologies are in the north and are patented, even though some emerging economies have taken critical steps in accelerating their low-carbon technology deployment in recent decades. Further, the overall capacity to adopt low-emission technologies continue to be limited for many southern economies. This is where greater international cooperation is needed, including through South-South cooperation among developing countries and with support of developed countries through triangular partnerships. In this context, first, I would like to emphasize South-South policy coordination and regional integration schemes can help developing countries to create conditions for a more ambitious development agenda that prioritize sustainable structural transformation and productive capacity. Second, Sharing knowledge in different contexts could help southern countries to identify and adopt concrete actions for climate mitigation and adaptation. Thirdly, increased South-South foreign direct investment and capital flows provide an opportunity for southern states to collaborate in ensuring such investment contribute to the development of a greener economy. Development banks can play important roles in this regard. At UN Office for South-South Cooperation, we aim to work with all partners to promote such cooperation. For example, through South-South Development Expo and South-South Galaxy platform, we provide mechanisms for countries and partners to share solutions and form partnerships for sustainable development. Through South-South Cooperation Trust Funds, we support concrete initiatives on South-South Cooperation climate action. Our Cities project supports Koidu City in Sierra Leone, for example, to cooperate with Kushat City in Bangladesh on waste management, and support Santiago in Chile in partnership with Hangzhou City in China on green transportation. Under the UN Fund for South-South Cooperation, the Republic of Korea set up a triangular cooperation facility to support Mekong River Commission member countries to enhance food, water, and energy nexus to improve livelihood at community level. We welcome you all to engage in South-South and triangular cooperation to build a sustainable future together. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. The floor is open for comments, questions. I have got one from the online audience. More are welcome. Anybody in the audience wanting to chip in at this stage? Otherwise, I will do. And I see a colleague, for example, from Kazakhstan sitting here in the middle and listening to our recorded speech from the UN. That reminded me that what I always went around saying in my past job at the EBRD, a bit like the World Bank, but focused on countries in Central Asia and around Europe, including Kazakhstan. And if people ask me, what is the thing you would really, really like to see? I always said, I'd like to see that the oil company of Kazakhstan, which is a big and competent company, that they really realize that it isn't so difficult. It's about getting started. And of course, for those companies out there that are having enormous revenues from oil and gas prices as they are now, I mean, you may get a little bit complacent. But after all, I mean, imagine what would happen. What would be the growth prospects for a country like Kazakhstan if some of those money went into saying, well, we just get started. We'll start being the really talented folks at putting up wind turbines, solar panels, running the smart grid. Something is difficult, technologically wise. Something is about getting it done. I saw a question just behind you.
Sure, I'll start off. Stuart Gill from Canada, professor. David, at the end of your talk, you made a comment about the need to design regulation to support innovation and not to inhibit it. And I want to invite you and other speakers to kind of dive into that one a little bit. Canada's last 3 economic strategy tables with industry have identified that as the #1 impediment to innovation in the country. So it seems like low-hanging fruit in a way. It doesn't cost you money, but it also seems incredibly difficult to do while still achieving the public protection objective of the regulations. So I wouldn't mind if you were willing to kind of go deeper into what that might mean tangibly about how you can align regulation for agility and innovation.
Yeah.
I can jump then, because we are a very regulated sector, as you know, because what is driven regulatory organizations in pharmaceutical sector is to secure safety of our patients, so that they are very stringent on that. And one of the lessons learned, and I want to quote this, it doesn't cost money to be more flexible in terms of regulatory without jeopardizing the safety concerns in our sector or other sectors. Just lessons learned to share with the audience and the panelists about what we understand of the need of more flexibility and global harmonization. One of the key success factors in terms of regulation in our sector during the COVID-19 crisis was dialogue among regional authorities. You know, it's very easy, just coordination, just to be a recognition that what is happening in one region is obviously directly recognized in other regions of the world. It's true that the geopolitical situation is not helping, by the way, but if we want to have regulations as one enabler and not a stopper of innovation, that it's one of the key maybe takeaways from our experience during COVID-19 in a very hyper-regulated sector. Flexibility, so harmonization, dialogue at global level among especially regional authorities. Secondly, flexibility. What is our understanding of flexibility? Some examples that maybe can be useful in other sectors. We are thinking about remote monitoring, not need to be physically in the inspection process, because sometimes regulation requires inspections. So digital innovation also in regulatory frameworks. For example, all the electronic submissions, again, digital can help on this regard. And third, maybe this idea of having more kind of purpose-driven dialogue with the private sector to anticipate what will be the need, you know, for the authorities that are regulatory authorities. If I may, my last reaction. I think it's absolutely needed. You know, when we are pushing for flexibility and harmonization, we are not saying weaken the regulatory standards, because it's a matter of trust. That is what is needed. It's trust for authorities when you are in the healthcare sector, but it's also trust of governments and citizens when we are in other technology sectors.
One quick follow-up. So those make sense. So at its core, innovation is about risk. And we yesterday talked about experimentation. So how do you get regulators who tend to be risk averse to be more open to accepting risk and experimentation when all of their training has been to be cautious and to avoid risk? I mean, innovation, you have to accept some risk upside and take the downsides of that risk too, right? How can we get regulators to recognize that some risk is good risk and some experimentation is good experimentation?
Thanks for using the microphone so that our virtual audience can also hear, and the rest of the panel. Would you want to reply?
My first reaction, I'm sorry, other panelists maybe can't contribute, but I think it's a matter of balancing risk and benefit. That is our day-to-day in pharma. So good assessment of benefits and risk balance. And that should be part of the definition of the speed of regulatory processes. If the benefit is so relevant as it was the crisis, obviously the risk was diminished. But this was in a crisis mode process and approach. How we can standardize this approach of better balance benefits and risks.
So how do we get regulators to accept the inherent risks involved in going in this direction? Is that what you'd like to say something about, Jon Arne? Please take the floor.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to also add on the regulatory issues. I think we definitely saw how regulators worked in partnership much quicker with the private sector during the pandemic. And I think we should definitely not go back to old practices when it comes to speed and also the willingness to have dialogue. So very important. Using digital technologies, blockchain technologies to have full value chain control and transparency, I think would be important. It's important in the health space, from the first production of active pharmaceutical ingredient to the patient, and it's important from field to fork in food security, for instance. But I just wanted to also highlight that In health, there is another regulatory regime, and that is related to the research and innovation process itself. As we know, and it should be like that, research on humans is heavily regulated. And what we did see, though, in the pandemic is that there are still a lot to do when it comes to harmonization, mutual recognition systems, when it comes to regulating and accepting clinical trials, collaboration, for instance, through multi-country trials. That is still an impediment, and it takes too long to set up larger trials and studies across countries, and that is really key and necessary. It's important for Europe to continue that development. It's important for the world. So I just wanted to share those remarks.
Alessandra.
Yes. So on the question, how do we communicate with regulators, I think the OECD is a good place to start. So in our area, science, technology, innovation, we work more on, if you will, anticipatory governance of emerging technologies. So that's the whole purpose is do not suffocate the innovation that will be coming down the line. But we have another part of the OECD who works on where you have regulators at the table. So we actually started this dialogue with them, and we are working with them to show them in the different technology areas what are the risks and the benefits. And so I don't know if David wants to elaborate more, but this is really the work we're trying to do in developing other types of, what we call them, principles in the OECD. So these are not regulations, they're softer things, but things on which different communities can agree upon, and so that we can not stifle innovation.
I'll come back to the floor, but I just have one thing here on the write-up for this session that I think is pretty important. And this is to be very concrete on some of the special measures that were taken on intellectual property rights during COVID. And I know, Amy, you have at WIPO, you made a study of the drivers of the COVID-19 vaccine development successes. And linked to that is this question about, should we waive IP rights on certain technologies? Because effectively that was sort of what we did globally on COVID development.
Yeah. So Jens, thanks. And thanks for having read this study that, so WIPO didn't conduct it. We commissioned an independent research team based out of Boston University's Questrom School of Business to look at what were the drivers of COVID-19 vaccine success. Because as David mentioned, it was absolutely unprecedented that the world basically had a very effective COVID-19 vaccine only 1 year after the genetic code of COVID-19 was shared with the world. So that was an unbelievable achievement. So how did we get there? And actually what the team at the Questrom School found was it was quite surprising. So they didn't identify IP as a barrier to innovation in developing this first generation of COVID-19 vaccines. Actually, they found that it was a very, very important jump starter because a lot of the mRNA technology had been IP protected, and it had already been licensed, and so it was then easy to in-license it to develop the COVID-19 vaccine. So IP was actually found to be a very positive driver of COVID-19 vaccine development success for the first generation of COVID-19 vaccines. What the researchers found were actually 3 of the biggest sticking points that impeded the development and the innovation of the first generation of COVID-19 vaccines. They found 3 main sticking points. The first was transparency in licensing agreements and arrangements. They found that there was not enough transparency in those licensing agreements around the development of mostly the mRNA-based COVID-19 vaccine. But as you know, not all of the first generation COVID-19 vaccines are mRNA-based. They also found an issue was the access to vaccines developed by public funding. So this is what I believe it was John Arnay mentioned, this idea that we can't socialize the risk and privatize the profits. So they found that that was one of the sticking points in the development of the first generation of COVID-19 vaccines. And then the third sticking point that they found was vaccine nationalism. So WIPO is actually, we've contracted now another independent party to do a follow-up study to this to look specifically into the licensing practices in the COVID-19 vaccine ecosystem, how transparent they've been, what's really helping to speed things up, what's unfortunately slowing things down. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the independent researchers that we worked with on the first study at Questrom School of Business did highlight that although patenting activity was actually a force for good in the development of the first generation of COVID-19 vaccines, they did say that it will be very important to look at the impacts that it has on all of the follow-on innovation, because there we could see that in some cases the licensing of these IP protected elements, and again, this is licensing practices, that could be an area to further look into. And Jens, I would just like to add that, WIPO doesn't have an institutional position on the IP rights waiver that was decided down at WTO. But I will say that we have a duty to provide technical assistance to our member states who wish to implement not only this waiver, but also any elements in the TRIPS waiver and in the Doha Declaration, because as you know, it's up to each individual country to put into place its national IP strategy and its national innovation ecosystem. And one of the things that we at WIPO do is we provide the technical assistance to our WIPO members to help them enshrine global agreements into their national IP system as they see fit.
Very interesting. I find this question super central. I mean, how do we balance the kind of general good of sharing knowledge, sharing, having patents taking a little bit of backseat, sharing data, versus the fact that the green transition is also about getting it done. It's about, I was mentioning Kazakhstan before, rolling out the really practical construction work of setting up a solar farm, of helping consumers to understand their energy consumption via a smart meter, and a lot of the kind of things that the private sector and market dynamics are typically good at. So I wonder if that sort of balance, and it can be inspired by COVID, and it can have to be a little bit different in the green domain, but if that is indeed one of the things that will be interesting to look at going forward. Joanna, we have heard you very well in the beginning, not so far in the discussion, so I wonder, is this an area that you would have thoughts on from the EU Commission? You are indeed the EU is all about having a common market, while at the same time having purposeful innovations, as you've been doing with the Horizon program. How do you see this? How do you see, in general, the balancing of a public sort of support, a public concern in innovation, at the same time having the market dynamics?
Well, I think it's all about, you have mentioned COVID, it's all about taking in the lessons, digesting them, and I think really going forward to help the accelerated deployment via different types of collaboration, like synergies, making synergies by design as well, and I can give you a few examples there, making sure that research and innovation remains open, first of all, and the innovations remain open, but also that there is the structure for them to be deployable. I mean, a lot of people, panelists here have been mentioning, rightly so, the importance of de-risking. The importance of having ways and means of, or toolbox, different toolboxes, again, mostly via collaboration between different institutions to de-risk the innovations. And I think that in itself makes for different components to be present and to create a new dynamic in the market that can gravitate towards having more deployment, maybe faster deployment, and deployment that reaches out to those areas and to those zones that are not normally going to be, within within the where one would expect it in the first line. One thing that remains to me clear is that I think it's an opportunity for us, referring to my latter point regarding, where would you expect these innovations to take root and to scale up. I think it's definitely the inequities, the vulnerabilities of countries. And I think in the COP27 we have seen also statistically, where the vulnerabilities of climate change, for instance, is felt most, and hence, the whole argument about the damage fund, etc. What I mean to say by this is that yes, we need thinking out of the box, but acting, I would say, rather out of the box through how we can collaborate and bring together instruments that normally would not be connectable. Even us, the European in the European Commission, we had to do quite a lot of this in terms of synergies between the programs, synergies between the funding instruments, but also, for instance, synergies by design between, for instance, the Horizon Europe, the missions, the European partnerships, which I mentioned earlier. You also have to think about new ways of how you put the governance structures in, for instance, even with the member states, with regional funds, connecting those together in order to make impact, and also to ensure that, there are different formulas, if you like, to be taken into account for to choose which innovations you're going to prioritize, first and foremost, for which region, for which area. Secondly, to ensure that the rules between the different programs, between the different instruments are actually compatible, which is not an obvious thing. And also to create new tools. Like, for instance, I'll give you one example with the Horizon Results Booster, where this is designed to bring innovation to the market and to maximize the impact of the projects by providing, for instance, free consulting services to those projects which have already been closed or ongoing projects from the FP7, from the past projects, Horizon 2020, from the predecessor of Horizon Europe, and Horizon Europe itself. Why? Because we want to be surgical in the way that we can actually provide advice and help to help the players have develop a business plan, and also to get coaching for go-to-market services. So, if we look at the LIFE program, this in itself is designed as a catalyst for the large-scale cross-border dissemination of environmental, energy, and climate solutions developed thanks to also the RNI framework program. So, obviously, if we go also to at an international stage, this is still internal cuisine, what I was talking about. But if we look at the Mission Innovation Acceleration Initiative, for instance, the idea is for the Commission to actually act as a catalyst for the deployment of RNI results in the wider sphere. So I think, in a few words, I think, this is all part of the de-risking culture, if you like, or the de-risking components, for innovation to actually take root and also be scaled up ASAP. Otherwise, we can forget the deployment, let alone the precipitation.
We're getting onto something, because now everybody on the panel wants to speak. Very short remarks. Jon Arne.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to share some reflections of the difference between green technologies and health technologies or pharma technologies, because I think on the health side, we have much more global markets with more concentrated supply chain, global scale benefits, also the ability then to use mechanisms like advanced market commitments, advanced procurement, so in a way incentivizing innovation. my at least impression of the green technology field is that that is more lacking. It's a much more diverse and maybe not sufficiently concentrated market. So we haven't really been able to structure incentives in the marketplace like what we have been able to do on the health side. Of course, we have seen some downsides now during the pandemic of that concentrated supply chain. And you mentioned vaccine nationalism and the challenges of actually having access in all regions. And I think the policy solution there now, and it's a very broad support for that, is to build up regional capacities for development as well as production on pharmacological solutions, vaccines, and in particular biologicals. But maybe, so in a way, we need to move from the health side more towards a more distributed sort of market and still benefiting from the global scale opportunities. I think the green technology may need to move towards more concentrated, more coherent marketplaces so that we can actually benefit from structured incentives where countries, governments can come together. Of course, that is inherently difficult because we have a health sector that is mostly, at least in developed countries, third-party paid, either through tax systems or to payroll taxes. And so we have the third party that can, in a way, aggregate demand. On clean energy, it's privatized. It's us as households, it's individual industries that buy energy. So we have lack of a system and a tradition in maybe the green technology space to be able to concentrate demand. But I think there we need to think about new solutions and also meeting the R&D side of the policies with the market-based solutions.
That was a very rich reply. Can you be brief?
Super brief. Three messages. I think just to echoing and reinforce the idea of lesson learned from COVID-19, IP was not a problem for access. It was not a problem. Second message, we have to assess what are the hurdles, because sometimes we apply principles, but not assessment of the hurdles that we are facing. The access is not based on production capacity. We have more production than demand. In some countries, there is the risk of not using the vaccines. It's not a problem of pricing and available to share benefits and social, because we have tier pricing, and we adapt the prices to the capacity to pay of the countries in the industry. So we have these mechanisms. So what is the problem of access, global access? Well, it's capacity of the healthcare systems in diagnosis and supply in the last mile. So maybe we have to focus our focus on how to access to innovation and reinforcing the national infrastructures more than blaming on hurdles that are not the real problem as seen for the COVID-19 perspective. So a message here to assess correctly what are the hurdles to access to innovation based on what we have learned from COVID-19.
Amy.
I just wanted to add very quickly because, some of the buzzwords that we hear all the time now is technology transfer. And we hear that not only in the global health space, especially in the COVID-19 space, but we also hear that in the green technology space. And technology transfer with the ultimate goal being local production, but the ultimate goal being to really foster and support innovation systems in developing countries. So we don't have a situation where most of your innovation is taking place in the global north and you have a lot of demand in the global south. I mean, ideally, we really want to diversify these areas where innovation is taking place and really help to support innovation ecosystems in developing countries. And one of the ways that we really seed that is through technology transfer. And if we look at what technology transfer is based on, a lot of it is, in the very beginning, it's based on licensing IP rights and licensing know-how. And so you actually see that IP rights, including patents, are providing the bedrock of trusted partnership in technology transfer. So, I mean, I leave you there to connect the dots with why there could be some confusion among the global community when we are simultaneously considering patent waivers and demanding more technology transfer. we just have to look at the logical, compatibility of something like that. And to look at a really positive example of where this is happening, and it's happening well, is the medicines patent pool.
Amy, thanks for your, I think you put it right on spot that, the devil is in the detail here on how should patents be used. I'd like, as we are approaching the end, just to take a step back. And in the beginning, we were asking, and yesterday we were asking, are there sort of something really big we need to do, breakthrough? Alessandra, you were showing us some of these scarcities we're running up against, the big challenges of, and I think you were also mentioning materials and so on. One topic that always comes to my mind is it really only possible to make solar panels based on a resource on which we were dependent from China, basically? Are there things like that where we would say, could we not come together as across the world on a research program that would really sort of make the whole supply chain of what we need for the green transition a little bit more resilient? Not to say that we should not use resources from China, definitely. Let's trade, let's collaborate, but let's also have more robust supply chains. Those very big transformative STI policies, is there a role for that? Alessandra, you have a long experience here at OECD. If we take that step back and ask ourselves, sorting out the IP system, what is, in a similar way, what are the sort of really big transformative policies we need?
Well, I mentioned some of them in the introduction, but research, transdisciplinary research is a big force for addressing global challenges. And research is a kind of open by default community. So maybe that's the easy bit, how you work across different disciplines and actors. So it's not multidisciplinarity, it's transdisciplinarity and engaging all the different actors, including citizens in setting agendas and so on. So that can be done globally, I guess. If we think that we should, the climate is a public good, like health, we should be thinking in these terms. But then, in terms of the instruments that we have or the way we design, also missions, that's a very effective way to address the challenge. Again, these are designed domestically mainly. There are some examples of global, but they're domestic mainly. So, our instruments, I give you an example, to address these challenges, you really need to have more directionality in all these instruments. So that's what we would like to change. But to give you an example, to support innovation, the most expensive public support program is R&D tax credits. So indirect ways of supporting with taxation, but it's very hard to direct with indirect with those R&D tax credits. So how do you do that if you want to encourage innovation in green by industries when you have those mechanisms in place? And again, I go back to blended finance because it's really the amount of blended finance we have. It's ridiculously low. It's right. It's like $20 billion per year, and we need. It's just insufficient. But there again, there is an issue of changing the mindset of people. So, for example, in the policy community in STI, they're really concentrating on funding things rather than financing things. So for them, it's also difficult to actually cooperate with the industry in a blended finance mechanism.
Thank you. You took us, I think, very well into our quick wrap-up with everyone. What are the knowledge gaps? What are the things we need to find out more about? Let's hear the panel in the order that you spoke. So, Joanna?
I'm just unmuting myself, sorry. Well, I think what are the lessons that we learned from this? I think we have to recognize the challenges and the opportunities, and we have to make the most out of the opportunities. And I think we definitely cannot detract from the long-term objective of the green transition, and I would say the medium term rather than long-term, the green transition and the digital as well, despite all the crises that we have. I think we should not allow the crisis to divert us. Actually, we should take it as a springboard to make sure that we remain creative, we remain effective, that we see where we need to deploy faster, to put the instruments in place, to be agile in making sure that the instruments, once tried and tested and work, should be proliferated and built upon. But if they do not work, we have to find other means to make sure that they happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanne. This is really just, half a minute as we are approaching the lunch break, also for our interpreters. I summarize you as saying a little bit like a good fellow yesterday, saying we don't have to think of a whole lot of knowledge gaps. We should really keep on in this track that we're in. Amy, what are the knowledge gaps?
I'm going to be really quick. For me, what I've learned over the past few years is that a very key knowledge gap among policymakers and more broadly among stakeholders is the global IP system. And IP in general. Many people, even people who are dealing with legislating this, just really don't have even a foundational understanding of how it works, what it does, what it doesn't do, and how it can be leveraged, and how it relates with licensing practices, and how it impacts access to technologies in a very positive way. I think there is a lack of understanding around the role of IP and how it intersects more broadly in the public policymaking space.
Thank you, very clear. Jon Arne.
I think the main problem is on the policy side is how to solve for scale when it comes to innovation incentives and technology development. Because these investments are large, we really need to invest more. The median size of countries is 6 million people, and we need to collaborate. And we need to do that in a context where most research and innovation funding agencies in countries are mandated only to fund nationally. So we need to really open up the research and innovation system to a larger extent and find models for collaboration so that we get to the scale necessary.
And then we're back on the stage. Do we have a knowledge gap?
From my side, three takeaways. That governments are doing their job at local and global level, providing sustainable funding and financing of science. Second takeaway, protecting IP and all what IP means, because then we ensure private sector does the work they have to do. Market is functioning. And the third one is ensure adequate regulatory frameworks, just to be an enabler and not a stopper.
Knowledge gap that has not been mentioned yet. So strategic intelligence for governments that are not able to anticipate and they are not able to do policy making in a risky environment. So like living labs and all sandboxes, policy experimentation is key, and we need to give them this explain these instruments to them.
Excellent. Many, many thanks, Alessandra, David, Joanna, Amy, and Jon Arne, and not least Xiaoyong, even if it was a video message. Thank you all here in the room.